A maid at 62, I secretly took my orphaned granddaughter to work. When she saw a billionaire guest, she screamed, "Look, Mommy's watch!" I saw the watch and froze in shock. I confronted him. He went pale, fell to his knees, and asked my granddaughter, "Who was your mom?" When she said the name, he broke down in tears. This changed everything. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Ethel, and at 62 years old, I never thought a child's scream would change everything I believed about my life. But that Tuesday morning in March, when my 8-year-old granddaughter Veda spotted something that shouldn't have existed, our world cracked wide open. I had been working as a housekeeper for the Whitmore family for 3 years. $500 a week to clean their marble floors, dust their crystal chandeliers, and pretend I didn't exist when they entertained their wealthy friends. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but after my daughter Sarah died 7 years ago, leaving me with a baby to raise on my own, dignity became a luxury I couldn't afford. That morning started like any other. I had dropped Veda off at school and arrived at the mansion by 7:30. The house always smelled like expensive furniture polish and fresh flowers, a stark contrast to our small apartment that reeked of the neighbors' cooking and had heating that worked only when it felt like it. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, barely looked up when I signed in. "The master bedroom needs extra attention today," she said, her voice clipped with the authority of someone who had never scrubbed a toilet in her life. "Mr. Whitmore has guests coming for lunch." I nodded and gathered my supplies. Jonathan Whitmore was rarely home during my shifts, which suited me fine. The few times I had seen him, he struck me as the type of man who looked through people like me as if we were furniture. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about rent money or medical bills. I was halfway through polishing the master bathroom when my phone rang. Veda's school. My heart immediately jumped to my throat the way it always did when they called. "Mrs. Morgan, Veda has a fever," the nurse explained. "You'll need to pick her up." I closed my eyes, calculating quickly. If I left now, I'd lose half a day's pay. But Veda had been fighting a cold all week, and with her asthma, I couldn't take any chances. I found Mrs. Henderson and explained the situation. "You can't just leave in the middle of your shift," she said, her face pinched with disapproval. "She's sick. She's 8 years old and has asthma." Mrs. Henderson sighed dramatically. "Fine, but this better not become a habit. Take her to the staff room until you're finished, and keep her quiet." The staff room was barely larger than a closet, tucked away behind the kitchen with no windows and furniture that belonged in a garage sale. But it was better than leaving Veda alone at home, feverish and struggling to breathe. I picked her up from school and brought her back with me, settling her on the old couch with her tattered stuffed rabbit and a book. "Stay here, sweetheart," I whispered, smoothing her damp forehead. "Grandma just needs to finish cleaning, and then we'll go home." Veda nodded sleepily. She had always been good about staying put when I brought her to work. She understood, in the way children do when they have no choice, that we needed this job. That the $500 a week paid for our $800 rent, her medications, and the groceries that kept us fed. I returned to my duties, working faster than usual. The lunch guests would arrive soon, and everything needed to be perfect. I was buffing water spots from the dining room mirrors when I heard voices in the foyer. Mr. Whitmore was greeting his guests, his voice carrying that smooth charm that probably opened doors and bank accounts with equal ease. I kept my head down and continued working. Invisible. That was the key to keeping jobs like this. Be thorough, be quiet, and never give them a reason to notice you unless absolutely necessary. But then I heard something that made my blood turn cold. A child's voice, high, clear, and unmistakably Veda's. "Grandma? Grandma? Where are you?" My heart stopped. She was supposed to stay in the staff room. I dropped the cloth and hurried toward the sound, but I was too late. By the time I reached the main hallway, Veda was already standing there in her wrinkled school clothes and mismatched socks, staring up at the group of well-dressed men with wide, fever-bright eyes. "I'm sorry," I began, rushing forward to collect her. "She's not feeling well, but Veda wasn't moving. She was staring at something with an expression I had never seen before. Not confusion or fear, but recognition. Pure, shocking recognition. "That's Mommy's watch," she said, her voice cutting through the polite conversation like a knife. The words hit me like a physical blow. I followed her gaze and saw what she was looking at. There, on the wrist of Jonathan Whitmore himself, was a gold vintage watch with an intricate face and a leather band. A watch I had seen 1,000 times before in the photographs I kept of my daughter. The same watch Sarah had worn in every picture from her last year of life. "What did you say?" Mr. Whitmore's voice had changed, becoming sharp and careful. Veda stepped closer, completely unaware of the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "That's my mommy's watch. She wore it every day. Grandma has pictures." I felt the world tilt sideways. The watch was distinctive, antique, with tiny diamonds around the face. It wasn't something you could find in any jewelry store. There was only one explanation for how Jonathan Whitmore could be wearing it, and that explanation made my legs weak. "Veda," I managed to whisper, reaching for her hand. "Come with Grandma." But she pulled away, her eyes still fixed on the watch. "Where did you get Mommy's watch? Did you know her? Did you know my mommy?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the stares of the other guests, their discomfort at witnessing this unexpected drama. But my eyes were locked on Jonathan Whitmore's face, and what I saw there confirmed my worst fears. He knew. He absolutely knew what that watch meant. His face had gone pale, and his hand instinctively moved to cover the watch. "I don't know what she's talking about," he said, but his voice was tight, strained. "That's a very unusual watch," one of his guests commented, clearly trying to lighten the mood. "Family heirloom?" "Something like that," Mr. Whitmore replied, but he wasn't looking at his friend. He was looking at Veda, and then at me, with an expression that was part guilt, part fear, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said quickly, taking Veda's hand more firmly. "We should go." But Veda wasn't finished. "It has a crack right there," she said, pointing at the watch face. "From when Mommy dropped it on the bathroom floor. She cried because she said it was important. She said someone special gave it to her." Jonathan Whitmore's hand was trembling now. I could see it, even from across the room. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this man had known my daughter. More than known her. He had loved her. And then he had broken her heart. The rest of that afternoon passed in a blur of forced normalcy that felt like acting in a play where I had forgotten all my lines. I managed to get Veda back to the staff room, but my hands shook as I tried to finish my work. Every few minutes I found myself stopping whatever I was doing, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah's watch, on Jonathan Whitmore's wrist, in his mansion, where I had been cleaning his floors and washing his dishes for 3 years, never knowing that this man had been part of my daughter's life. Veda fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from her fever and the strange encounter. I watched her small chest rise and fall, thinking about all the times she had asked me about her mother, about her father, about why we were alone. I had told her that some stories were too sad to share, that when she was older I would explain everything. But the truth was, I didn't know everything. Sarah had been so secretive in those last months before Veda was born. She had stopped talking about the man she was seeing, had become withdrawn and sad in ways that worried me, and then she died, taking all her secrets with her. By 5 o'clock, the lunch guests had left, and the mansion had settled into its usual afternoon quiet. Mrs. Henderson dismissed me curtly, clearly annoyed about the morning's disruption. I gathered my things and prepared to wake Veda when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the staff room. "Mrs. Morgan?" Jonathan Whitmore's voice came through the door. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" My stomach clenched. I had hoped to leave without another confrontation, to take time to think about what I had witnessed. But apparently, he wasn't going to let that happen. I opened the door and found him standing there, still wearing that suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. But his earlier composure was gone. His face was drawn, and there were lines around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "Your granddaughter," he began, then stopped. "The watch she mentioned. Could you tell me about it?" I glanced back at Veda, still sleeping on the couch. What do you want to know? She said it belonged to her mother. You have photographs? The careful way he asked the question told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't curious. He wasn't making polite conversation. He was afraid. I do, I said, keeping my voice steady. Lots of them. Sarah wore that watch every single day for the last 2 years of her life. Said it was a gift from someone she loved. Something flickered across his face at the mention of my daughter's name. Sarah, he repeated quietly. Sarah Elizabeth Morgan. She died 7 years ago, 3 days after Veda was born. Complications from the delivery. I watched his face carefully. She was 29 years old and beautiful and scared. Scared because the man who gave her that watch had disappeared from her life right when she needed him most. Jonathan stepped backward as if I had slapped him. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Have there? I moved closer, lowering my voice so I wouldn't wake Veda. Because my granddaughter has been looking at pictures of that watch her entire life. She knows every scratch on it, every detail. And now here you are, wearing it, pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. Mrs. Morgan, I understand you're upset, but upset? I felt 8 years of grief and anger rising in my chest. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Raising that little girl on my own, working jobs like this one just to keep food on the table, never knowing why her father walked away? His face had gone completely white now. I don't know anything about a father. But even as he said it, I could see the lie in his eyes. The guilt was written all over him, in the way he couldn't meet my gaze, in the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. Where did you get the watch? I asked bluntly. It's been in my family for years. That's not true. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photo album I kept of Sarah. Look at this. I showed him a picture of my daughter taken just months before Veda was born. She was sitting in our old kitchen, laughing at something off camera, and the watch was clearly visible on her wrist. Jonathan stared at the photo for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something that looked like pain. She was beautiful, he said quietly. Yes, she was. And she loved someone very much. Someone who gave her that watch and then broke her heart. I put the phone away. Someone who left her pregnant and alone. I never. He started to speak, then stopped himself. You never what? He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I never knew about the baby. The admission hung between us like a physical thing. I felt my legs go weak, and I had to lean against the doorframe to stay upright. After all these years of wondering, of imagining what kind of man could abandon my daughter, here he was, standing in front of me, wearing her watch, claiming ignorance about the child he had left behind. You never knew, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. Or you never wanted to know? Mrs. Morgan, I understand you're angry, but this is complicated. Complicated. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. My daughter cried herself to sleep every night for months after you left. She wouldn't tell me what happened, but I could see her heart breaking day by day. And then when she found out she was pregnant, I stopped, remembering those dark days when Sarah could barely get out of bed. I didn't know, he said again, but there was something in his tone that suggested the truth was more nuanced than that. But you knew her. You gave her that watch. He nodded slowly. Yes. And then you disappeared. Another nod, even more reluctant. Why? He looked toward the staff room where Veda was sleeping, then back at me. I was engaged to someone else. Someone my family expected me to marry. Sarah knew that from the beginning. The casual way he said it, as if my daughter's heartbreak had been an acceptable casualty in his well-ordered life, made me see red. So she was what? A distraction? Something to keep you entertained until your real life started? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you used my daughter and threw her away when it became inconvenient. Jonathan ran a hand through his silver hair, and for the first time he looked his age. I cared about her, more than I should have, but I had obligations, commitments that were made long before I met Sarah. And she had a baby, your baby. Where were your obligations to her? I told you I didn't know. Stop saying that, I snapped, then immediately looked toward Veda, relieved to see she was still sleeping. You may not have known she was pregnant, but you knew you were abandoning someone who loved you. You knew you were taking that watch, which clearly meant something to her, and walking away. His jaw tightened. I didn't take anything. I gave her that watch. It was mine to give. And apparently yours to reclaim. She returned it to me. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What? The day I told her about my engagement, she gave me back the watch and told me she never wanted to see me again. I stared at him, trying to process this new information. In all the pictures I had of Sarah from that last year, she was wearing that watch. If she had given it back to him. When did you see her last? I asked. 8 years ago, maybe 9. But that didn't make sense. Veda was 8 years old, and Sarah had been wearing the watch when she was born. I had the hospital bracelet photos to prove it. That's impossible, I said. She had that watch when Veda was born. I have pictures. Something shifted in Jonathan's expression. Are you certain it was the same watch? Absolutely certain. My granddaughter recognized every detail of it. A long silence stretched between us. I could see him thinking, calculating, trying to make sense of something that clearly didn't fit with what he believed to be true. Mr. Whitmore, I said slowly, I think there are things about my daughter's last months that neither of us understands. He nodded grimly. I think you might be right. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. I went through the motions of my normal routine, taking Veda to school, cleaning other houses in the neighborhood, making dinner from whatever was on sale at the grocery store. But my mind was stuck in that hallway, replaying every word of my conversation with Jonathan Whitmore. He had known my daughter. He had loved her, in his way. And somewhere in the timeline, I thought I understood. There were pieces missing that didn't make sense. On Friday afternoon, as I was folding laundry in our cramped living room while Veda did her homework at the kitchen table, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer it. Mrs. Morgan? This is Jonathan Whitmore. Could we meet somewhere private? I have some information I think you need to hear. My first instinct was to hang up. I had spent 3 days trying to push our conversation out of my mind, trying to focus on the life I had built for Veda and me. Getting involved with whatever guilt or confusion Jonathan Whitmore was working through seemed like a dangerous distraction. But then I looked at Veda, bent over her math homework with the kind of fierce concentration that reminded me so much of Sarah, and I knew I couldn't let this go. If there were answers about her father, about why Sarah had been so sad in those last months, I owed it to both of them to find out. Where? I asked. There's a diner on Maple Street near the hospital. Murphy's. Could you meet me there at 7? I arranged for Mrs. Chen from next door to watch Veda, telling her I had a work emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. My entire livelihood depended on keeping my job at the Whitmore house, and this conversation could very well end that. Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that hadn't changed its decor since 1975. All cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. Jonathan was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee that looked untouched. He had changed out of his usual expensive suits into jeans and a sweater, but he still looked out of place among the working-class families and hospital staff who made up the dinner crowd. Thank you for coming, he said as I slid into the booth across from him. You said you had information. He nodded, reaching into the messenger bag beside him. I spent the last 2 days going through some old papers, trying to piece together the timeline we discussed. I found these. He placed a small stack of envelopes on the table between us. They were addressed to him in handwriting I recognized immediately. Sarah's careful cursive, the same writing that had filled countless birthday cards and grocery lists. She wrote to you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For months after we broke up, the first few were angry, which I understood. I had hurt her badly, but then they changed. He pulled one envelope from the stack. This one came about 6 months after I told her about my engagement. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Jonathan, I know you probably throw these letters away without reading them, but I have to try one more time. I'm pregnant. The baby is due in March. I'm not asking you to leave Margaret or change your life. I just thought you should know. I still love you. I probably always will. But I understand now that love isn't always enough. Sarah. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. March. Veda had been born in March, 8 years ago. You got this letter, I said, looking up at him. You knew she was pregnant. His face was gray, aged years in the harsh fluorescent light. I never saw it. I had my secretary handle my personal mail during that time, and I told her to return anything from Sarah unopened. Your secretary. Margaret and I were having problems. She was suspicious about the breakup with Sarah, asking questions I couldn't answer honestly. I thought the cleanest break would be to cut off all contact completely. I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. So Sarah wrote to tell you about your daughter, and you sent the letter back without reading it. I didn't know what it said. I just knew that continuing to have any contact with her would complicate everything. Everything, I repeated. Your convenient life. Your appropriate marriage. Yes, he said quietly. That's exactly what it was. There were more letters in the stack. I opened another one, dated 2 months later. Jonathan. I went to the doctor yesterday. The baby is healthy. It's a girl. I've been thinking about names, and I keep coming back to Victoria after your grandmother. You told me once that she was the only person in your family who really understood you. I bought a crib yesterday with money I've been saving. It's not much, but it's sturdy. I keep imagining what she'll look like, whether she'll have your eyes or mine. I miss you so much it feels like drowning sometimes, but I'm trying to be strong for her. Sarah. Victoria, I whispered. She was going to name the baby Victoria. Jonathan's hands were shaking now. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She was the most important person in my life. But Veda's name is Veda, not Victoria. Keep reading. The next letter was dated just weeks before Sarah's due date. Jonathan. I saw the wedding announcement in the paper. You and Margaret looked beautiful together. I hope you'll be happy. I've decided to name the baby Veda instead of Victoria. It means knowledge or wisdom in Sanskrit. I want her to be smarter than her parents. Smart enough to know her own worth and not settle for someone who can't choose her completely. This is the last letter I'll write, I promise. But I wanted you to know that I forgive you. I don't understand your choice, but I forgive it. Sarah. I sat back against the vinyl booth, overwhelmed by the weight of my daughter's words. All this time I had imagined that Veda's father was some cruel man who had used Sarah and thrown her away. But the truth was more complicated. He hadn't been cruel exactly. He had been weak. There's one more, Jonathan said softly. This envelope was different, heavier. When I opened it, Sarah's hospital bracelet fell out onto the table, the one she had worn when Veda was born. Jonathan, I know I said the last letter would be the last, but I lied. I'm in the hospital. There were complications, and the doctors aren't sure I'm going to make it. If something happens to me, I need you to know about your daughter. Her name is Veda Elizabeth Morgan, and she was born on March 15th at 3:47 in the morning. She weighs 6 pounds, 4 ounces, and she's perfect. I'm sending you my hospital bracelet so you'll know this isn't some kind of game or manipulation. If you want to find her, her grandmother's name is Ethel Morgan, and we live on Elm Street. I loved you, Jonathan. I loved you enough to let you go. Please love her enough to find her if I can't be here to take care of her myself. All my love, Sarah. The date on the hospital bracelet was March 15th, 8 years ago, 3 days before Sarah died. You got this letter too, I said, my voice hollow. 6 months after it was mailed. My secretary had been stockpiling them, thinking eventually I would want to see them. When she finally gave them to me, it was too late. By then, Sarah was gone. I looked at this man sitting across from me, wealthy, powerful, respected in his community, and saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a monster, but as a coward who had made choices that destroyed the woman I loved most in the world. So you knew, I said slowly. For 7.5 years, you knew you had a daughter, and you did nothing. I tried to find you. I hired investigators, but the address in the letter was wrong. You had moved. We moved because I couldn't afford the rent after Sarah died. I had to take Veda and find somewhere cheaper. I know. By the time I found the right address, you had moved again, and then again. The investigator told me it would be impossible to track you without more information. I laughed bitterly. Impossible? Do you know how many nights I lay awake wondering if Veda's father even knew she existed? Do you know how many times she asked me why her daddy didn't want her? I'm sorry. The words were so quiet I almost didn't hear them. Sorry doesn't give me back 8 years. Sorry doesn't give Veda a father when she needed one. I know. We sat in silence for a long moment. Around us, the diner continued its evening rhythm, the clink of silverware, the hum of conversation, the hiss of the grill, normal people living normal lives, unaware that my entire understanding of the past 8 years was crumbling. The watch, I said finally. Explain the watch. Jonathan reached into his bag again and pulled out a small jewelry box. Sarah didn't give it back to me when we broke up. She kept it, and according to these letters, she wore it every day until she died. Then how do you have it now? After I finally found out about the letters, I went to the hospital where she died. They had a box of her personal effects that no one had ever claimed. The watch was in there, along with some jewelry and the clothes she was wearing when she was admitted. The room seemed to tilt sideways. You went to the hospital and took her things? I told them I was family. I wanted to have something of hers, something that connected me to those months I missed. You had no right. The words came out low and dangerous. I know. Those were her things. They belonged to Veda. You're right. I stared at the jewelry box, thinking about all the nights Veda had looked through Sarah's photo albums, asking about the pretty watch her mama used to wear. All this time, it had been sitting in Jonathan Whitmore's house while we struggled to pay for groceries. I want it back, I said. Of course. He pushed the box across the table. There are other things too. A necklace, some rings. They're at the house. I opened the box and saw the watch that had started everything. It looked smaller than I remembered from the photographs, more delicate, but it was definitely the same one, down to the tiny crack Veda had mentioned. There's something else you should know, Jonathan said as I studied the watch, about why I've been looking for you all these years. I looked up, and the expression on his face made my stomach clench. I'm dying, Mrs. Morgan. Pancreatic cancer. I have maybe 6 months left. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I couldn't put out. Dying. 6 months. I stared at Jonathan Whitmore across the diner table, trying to reconcile this news with the anger that had been burning in my chest for days. That's why you're telling me this now, I said finally. The guilt is eating at you, and you want to clear your conscience before you die. Partly, he admitted, but also because I want to do right by Veda, by Sarah's memory. I closed the jewelry box with the watch inside, my fingers tightening around it. What does that mean exactly? I want to provide for her. College fund, medical expenses, whatever she needs. I have a will that needs updating. The casual way he said it, as if Veda were a charity case rather than his flesh and blood, made something snap inside me. She doesn't need your money, I said sharply. She needs her father. I can't be her father. Not in the way she deserves. Why not? He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as his tell when he was uncomfortable. My life is complicated. Margaret and I never had children, but we have a certain social standing, obligations. The revelation that I have an 8-year-old daughter from an affair would destroy everything we've built. Everything you've built, I repeated slowly. And what about what Veda could build? What about her right to know where she comes from? She's better off without that burden. Burden? The word came out like a slap. Is that what you think she is? A burden? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're more concerned about your reputation than your daughter's well-being. Jonathan's jaw tightened. You don't understand the complexities. I understand perfectly. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so the other diners wouldn't hear but making sure he caught every word. You're a coward who hid behind his secretary's skirts for years, and now that you're dying, you want to throw some money at the problem so you can feel better about yourself. That's not fair. Fair? I almost laughed. You want to talk about fair? Sarah worked 2 jobs while she was pregnant because she couldn't afford prenatal care. I've been cleaning houses for 12 years to put food on the table and keep Veda in school. We've been living paycheck to paycheck while you sit in your mansion wearing her mother's watch. Don't you dare talk to me about fair. The silence that followed was thick with tension. I could see other customers glancing our way, sensing the conflict even if they couldn't hear the details. I know you're angry, Jonathan said finally. You have every right to be. But think about what's best for Veda. A financial foundation for her future versus the chaos that would come from revealing the truth. The truth isn't chaos. It's just truth. My world would eat her alive. The media attention, the speculation about Margaret and me, the whispers at school. Is that really what you want for her? I thought about Veda, asleep in her narrow bed in our tiny apartment, surrounded by secondhand furniture and dreams bigger than our circumstances. She was smart, resilient, curious about everything. But she was also 8 years old and had never had a father figure in her life. She asks about her father, I said quietly. All the time. She's made up stories about him being a soldier or a doctor or a teacher who had to go away for important work. She needs to know she wasn't abandoned because she wasn't good enough. She wasn't abandoned. I didn't know, but you know now. And you're choosing to abandon her all over again. Jonathan's face went pale. I'm trying to do what's right. For who? For her or for you? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I stood up, clutching the jewelry box so tightly my knuckles were white. I want the rest of Sarah's things, and I want you to stay away from us. Mrs. Morgan, please, let me help her financially, at least. We don't want your help. We've managed fine without you for 8 years and we'll continue to manage fine. But think about college, I'll figure it out. The same way I've figured out everything else. I was halfway to the door when his voice stopped me. What will you tell her about me? I turned back, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw genuine pain in his eyes. Not guilt, not fear, but actual heartbreak. Nothing, I said. Because as far as Veda is concerned, you don't exist. The walk home felt endless. I kept Sarah's jewelry box tucked inside my jacket, the weight of it pressing against my ribs like a physical ache. By the time I reached our apartment building, I had made a decision that felt both right and terrible at the same time. Mrs. Chen was watching television when I knocked on her door to collect Veda. How was she? I asked as Veda gathered her backpack and homework. Perfect, as always. Did your work emergency get resolved? I nodded, not trusting myself to elaborate on the lie. Back in our apartment, I helped Veda get ready for bed, going through our usual routine of teeth brushing and story reading and checking that her inhaler was within reach. She chatted about her day at school, about a test she was nervous about a boy in her class who had been mean to one of her friends. Normal 8-year-old concerns, problems I could help her solve. Grandma, she said as I was tucking her in. Remember that man with Mommy's watch? My stomach clenched. What about him? Do you think he really knew her? I sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her dark hair away from her face. She had Sarah's eyes, deep brown, intelligent, always searching. But her nose was different, smaller, more angular, like Jonathan's. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people just have similar things. But it had the crack, the exact same crack. Maybe there's more than one watch like that. Veda frowned, clearly not convinced. Could you ask him? Next time you see him at work? The innocence in her question nearly broke my heart. She had no idea that her simple observation had upended everything I thought I knew about her father. She was just a curious little girl who had spotted something familiar. We'll see, I said, kissing her forehead. Sleep now. After she was asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with the jewelry box open in front of me. Inside were the watch, a thin gold chain with Sarah's initial, and a small diamond ring I remembered her wearing on her right hand. Simple pieces, nothing extravagant, but they had been hers. I picked up the watch and studied it in the lamplight. The face was cream-colored with delicate Roman numerals, and the crack Veda had mentioned ran from the 6 to the 8 like a tiny lightning bolt. Sarah had been so careful with her things, but I remembered the day she had dropped this. She had been about 7 months pregnant, tired and clumsy with the weight of carrying Veda. When the watch hit the bathroom tile, she had cried for 20 minutes. It was his grandmother's, she had told me through her tears. It's probably worth more than everything else I own combined. But she had refused to take it to be repaired, said it was too expensive and she couldn't risk making it worse. She had worn it with the crack for the last 2 months of her life. Now I understood why. It wasn't just about the money. It was about holding on to the last tangible piece of the man she loved, even if he had chosen someone else. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. I almost didn't answer when I saw it was an unknown number, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Morgan, this is Jonathan. Please don't hang up. I told you to stay away from us." "I know, and I will. But there's something else you need to know. About my will." "I don't care about your will. I'm leaving everything to Veda." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "The house, the investments, everything. Margaret and I have been separated for 3 years. We just haven't made it public. She has her own family money. Veda is my only heir." I sank into a chair, the phone pressed against my ear. "How much money are we talking about?" "Approximately $200 million. The number was so large it didn't seem real. 200 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. "She can't inherit that much money at 8 years old," I said weakly. "It would be held in trust until she's 25, with you as the trustee. You would have complete control over how it's used for her benefit." I thought about our $800 rent, about the nights I lay awake calculating whether we could afford Veda's asthma medication and groceries in the same week, about the second-hand clothes and the broken heating that the landlord refused to fix. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's the only thing I can do. I can't be her father, but I can make sure she never wants for anything. Money isn't everything." "No," he said quietly, "but it's something, and it's the only something I have left to give." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, watching the streetlight filter through our thin curtains and listening to the sound of Veda's steady breathing from the bedroom. In a few months, Jonathan Whitmore would be dead, and my granddaughter would be one of the richest little girls in the state. But she still wouldn't have a father. She still wouldn't have the answers to the questions that kept her awake sometimes, wondering why she was different from the other kids at school who had dads who came to school plays and helped with science projects. The money would change our circumstances, but it wouldn't change the fact that the man who was her father had chosen his comfortable life over her, just like he had chosen it over her mother. I picked up Sarah's watch again, running my finger along the crack that had never been repaired. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Some absences couldn't be filled, no matter how much money you threw at them. But the money would mean Veda could go to college anywhere she wanted. It would mean she could pursue her dreams without the weight of financial worry that had shaped every decision in my adult life. It would mean she could have choices that Sarah never had, opportunities I could never give her on my cleaning lady's salary. As much as I hated Jonathan Whitmore for his cowardice, I couldn't bring myself to hate his final gift to his daughter, even if it came wrapped in guilt and delivered too late to matter in the ways that really counted. 3 weeks passed in an uneasy quiet. I returned to work at the Whitmore mansion as if nothing had happened, cleaning the same rooms, following the same routines. But everything felt different now. I couldn't dust his study without thinking about those letters Sarah had written. I couldn't vacuum the hallway where Veda had first spotted the watch without remembering the look of guilt on Jonathan's face. He was rarely home during my shifts anyway. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that he was spending more time at his doctor's appointments, though she said it in the casual way people discuss routine maintenance rather than a man facing his own mortality. I had told Veda that I had spoken to the man with the watch, and that he had confirmed it wasn't her mother's after all. Just a similar design, I explained. She had accepted this explanation with the resilience that children show when adults give them answers that don't quite make sense, but signal that the conversation is over. The watch itself sat in my jewelry box at home, wrapped in one of Sarah's old scarves. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Wearing it felt wrong, like claiming something that belonged to my daughter's ghost. But leaving it hidden felt wrong too, like denying the connection it represented. On a Thursday afternoon in early April, I was reorganizing the linen closet when Mrs. Henderson found me, her usually stern expression replaced by something that looked like concern. "Mrs. Morgan, I need to speak with you about your schedule." I set down the stack of towels I had been folding. "Is there a problem?" "Mr. Whitmore is quite ill. He's asked me to reduce the household staff temporarily." "I'm sorry, but we won't be needing your services for the foreseeable future." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. $500 a week, gone. Without that income, we would have to move again, find somewhere even cheaper. Veda would have to change schools, leave behind the friends she had finally made. "I see," I managed to say. "Will you need me to finish out the week?" "Today will be your last day. Mr. Whitmore asked me to give you this." She handed me an envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a check for $2,000, 4 weeks severance pay, and a short note. "Mrs. Morgan, I hope you'll understand that this decision has nothing to do with your work, which has always been excellent. I wish you and Veda all the best. J. Whitmore." I stared at the check, trying to process what had just happened. He was pushing me away, cutting off any possibility of contact before his condition worsened. It was probably for the best, I told myself. Clean break, no complications. But as I gathered my cleaning supplies and walked through the mansion one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really about his illness. This was about fear. Fear of what might happen if he saw too much of Veda, if she started asking more questions, if his carefully controlled life began to unravel. 2 days later, I was sitting in our apartment going through job listings when my phone rang. The number looked familiar, but it took me a moment to place it. "Mrs. Morgan? This is Dr. Patricia Reeves. I'm Mr. Whitmore's oncologist. He's asked me to contact you." My heart started pounding. "Is he all right?" "He's in the hospital. His condition has deteriorated more rapidly than we anticipated. He's asking to see you and your granddaughter. He says it's urgent." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Dr. Reeves, I don't think that's a good idea. Veda doesn't know about their connection, and I don't want to confuse her. I understand your concerns, but Mrs. Morgan, I need to be direct with you. Mr. Whitmore may not have much time left. Days, not weeks. He seems quite distressed about something involving your granddaughter, and in my experience, patients who have unfinished business often struggle more at the end." "What kind of unfinished business?" "He mentioned something about letters. Documents that need to be signed. He says you'll understand." I did understand. The will. The $200 million that would change Veda's life forever. But accepting that money would mean admitting that Jonathan was her father, and I still wasn't sure I was ready to open that door. "Where is he?" "St. Mary's Hospital, room 412. Mrs. Morgan, if you're going to come, please come soon." I hung up and sat staring at the wall, my mind racing. Veda was at school and wouldn't be home for 3 hours. I could go to the hospital, sign whatever documents he needed signed, and be back before she ever knew I was gone. Keep it simple. Keep it clean. Keep her out of the emotional mess that came with having a dying father who had never wanted to know her. But as I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, I couldn't shake the memory of Veda's face when she had seen that watch. The excitement in her voice when she thought she had found a connection to her mother. Maybe she deserved to know the truth, even if it was complicated and painful. 30 minutes later, I was standing outside room 412 at St. Mary's Hospital. Through the partially open door, I could see Jonathan connected to various machines, his skin gray and his breathing labored. He looked nothing like the confident, well-dressed man I had been cleaning up after for 3 years. He looked fragile, human, afraid. I knocked softly on the doorframe. Mr. Whitmore? His eyes opened, and when he saw me, relief flooded his face. Ethel, thank you for coming. It was the first time he had ever used my first name. Doctor, Reeves said you needed to see me. I do. Please, sit down. I pulled a chair closer to his bed, but remained standing. What's this about, Jonathan? I've been thinking about our conversation at the diner, about what you said about Veda needing to know her father. I thought you had made your feelings clear on that subject. He struggled to sit up straighter, wincing with the effort. I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things. What changed your mind? I had a dream about Sarah. She was holding Veda as a baby, and she looked at me and said, "She's going to wonder her whole life why you didn't choose her." When I woke up, I realized that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm choosing my comfort, my reputation, over my daughter's need to know where she comes from. I felt something shift in my chest, a small crack in the wall of anger I had built around this situation. It's a little late for that realization, don't you think? Yes, but not too late to do something about it. What do you want to do? I want to meet her. Really meet her. I want her to know who I am before I die. I stared at him, trying to read the sincerity in his face. And then what? You have this deathbed confession. She gets to say goodbye to a father she never knew she had. And then I'm left to pick up the pieces of her grief? That seems incredibly selfish. I know how it sounds. But Ethel, I've spent the last 3 weeks researching you and Veda. I know about her grades, her interests, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. I know you've been saving money for years to buy her a bicycle for her 9th birthday. I know she's been asking for piano lessons, but you can't afford them. The fact that he had been watching us, learning about our lives from a distance, should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like something I hadn't expected from him. It felt like caring. How do you know all that? I hired someone to do a background check, not to invade your privacy, but because I wanted to understand what kind of life she has, what kind of person she's becoming without me. And what did you find? I found a little girl who is smart and kind and resilient. I found a grandmother who has sacrificed everything to give her the best life possible. And I found myself wishing I could have been part of that. I sank into the chair, suddenly exhausted. Jonathan, even if I agreed to this, how would I explain it to her? Veda? Meet your father who's been alive your whole life but chose not to be part of it until now? That's going to destroy her. We could start smaller. Maybe you could bring her to visit me in the hospital. As a family friend? Let her get to know me a little before we tell her the truth. And then what? She gets attached to you just in time to watch you die? The bluntness of my words made him flinch, but he didn't look away. Maybe, but isn't a short time with her father better than no time at all? I don't know. Is it? We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the beeping of his monitors and the distant noise of the hospital around us. Finally, Jonathan reached for something on his bedside table. I want to show you something. It was a photograph, clearly recent, taken with a long-distance lens. Veda and I were walking out of her school, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her face animated as she told me something that had happened during her day. I was smiling down at her, my hand on her shoulder. When was this taken? I asked. Last week. The investigator I hired took it to confirm her identity for the will, but when I saw it, I couldn't stop looking at it. She looks so much like Sarah. But there's something else too. Something around the eyes, the shape of her face. She looks like you, I said quietly. Yes. And when I saw that, I realized that she's not just Sarah's daughter. She's mine too. I've missed 8 years of watching her grow up, of being part of her life. I can't get those years back, but I can try to make the time I have left count for something. I studied the photograph, seeing Veda through her father's eyes for the first time. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. If I agree to this, I said slowly, there have to be conditions. Anything. First, we do this slowly. You don't get to dump the truth on her all at once and then disappear. If you're going to be part of her life, even for a short time, You have to think about what that means for her emotionally. I understand. Second, if at any point I think this is hurting her more than helping her, we stop. No arguments, no negotiations. Agreed. Third, the money stays out of this until she's old enough to understand what it means. She doesn't need to know about the inheritance while she's grieving. Jonathan nodded slowly. Those are fair conditions. I looked at the photograph one more time, then handed it back to him. I'll bring her tomorrow after school. But Jonathan, if you break her heart the way you broke her mother's, I will make sure she forgets you ever existed. For the first time since I had arrived, he smiled. It was a weak smile, shadowed by pain and medication, but it was genuine. Thank you, Ethel, for giving me this chance. As I left the hospital, I realized that I had just agreed to something that would change everything for Veda and me. In trying to protect her from the truth about her father, I had kept her from the possibility of knowing him at all. Now I was about to give her both the gift and the burden of that knowledge. I just hoped I was making the right choice. Grandma, why are we visiting someone in the hospital? Veda asked as we walked through the automatic doors of St. Mary's. She was wearing her best dress, the navy blue one with tiny flowers that I had found at a thrift store 6 months ago, and clutching a drawing she had made during art class that afternoon. Mr. Whitmore is very sick, I explained, my heart pounding with each step toward the elevator. He's someone Grandma used to work for, and he doesn't have any family to visit him. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I had spent most of the previous night lying awake, practicing different ways to explain this situation to an 8-year-old who had no idea her world was about to change forever. Is he the man with Mommy's watch? She asked as we stepped into the elevator. I pressed the button for the 4th floor, buying myself a few seconds to answer. Yes, sweetheart, he is. And it really wasn't Mommy's watch? It's complicated, I said, which had become my standard response when she asked questions I wasn't ready to answer completely. Room 412 felt different this time. Jonathan had clearly prepared for our visit. His hair was combed. He was wearing a clean hospital gown instead of the rumpled one from yesterday, and there was a small vase of flowers on his bedside table. When we walked in, his eyes immediately went to Veda, and I watched his face transform. It was like seeing Sarah for the first time all over again. The same wonder, the same instant love, the same recognition of something precious and irreplaceable. Hello, he said softly, his voice gentle in a way I had never heard from him before. You must be Veda. She nodded, suddenly shy in the way children get around strangers in hospitals. Grandma says you're sick. I am, but I'm feeling much better now that you're here to visit me. Veda looked around the room, taking in the machines and monitors with the frank curiosity of childhood. Does it hurt? Sometimes, but the doctors give me medicine that helps. She held up her drawing, which showed a stick figure family standing in front of a house with a giant sun overhead. I made this for you. Grandma said you don't have family to visit. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as he took the picture. This is beautiful, Veda. Thank you so much. That's me and Grandma, she explained, pointing to the 2 figures holding hands. And that's our apartment building. It's not very big, but we like it. It looks perfect, he said, studying the drawing as if it were a masterpiece. Where do you go to school? Roosevelt Elementary. I'm in 3rd grade. My teacher's name is Mrs. Patterson, and she says I'm very good at math. That's wonderful. Math was always my favorite subject, too. I watched this conversation unfold, amazed at how easily they fell into talking with each other. Jonathan asked about her friends, her favorite books, her dreams for the future. Veda told him about wanting to be a veterinarian, about the stray cat she fed behind our apartment building, about how she was saving her allowance money to buy it food and toys. After 30 minutes, I could see that Jonathan was getting tired, though he was clearly fighting to stay engaged with Veda's chatter. Sweetheart, I said gently, maybe we should let Mr. Whitmore rest now. But I want to ask him about the watch, she said, turning back to Jonathan with that direct way children have of cutting straight to the heart of things. Jonathan looked at me and I nodded slightly. We had agreed that he could tell her about knowing her mother, just not the full extent of their relationship. The watch belonged to someone very special to me, he said carefully. A woman named Sarah. She was beautiful and kind, just like you. Veda's eyes widened. That was my mommy's name, Sarah Elizabeth Morgan. I know. Your mother and I were friends a long time ago. Did you love her? The question was so simple, so direct, that it took my breath away. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Yes, Veda. I loved her very much. Then why didn't you marry her? I started to interrupt, to redirect the conversation away from territory that was too complicated for an 8-year-old to navigate. But Jonathan held up a hand, asking me to let him answer. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, he said. Sometimes they think they know what's best, but they're wrong. I made a very big mistake with your mother, and I've regretted it every day since. Veda considered this with the seriousness that children bring to adult problems they don't fully understand. Grandma says Mommy went to heaven when I was born. She did. And I bet she's watching over you right now, very proud of the amazing little girl you've become. Do you think she's mad at you for your mistake? Jonathan's composure finally cracked. Tears slid down his cheeks as he looked at this child, his child, who was asking the questions that had tormented him for years. I hope she's forgiven me, he whispered. Veda studied his face with that intense way children have of trying to understand the emotional landscape of adults. Then, without warning, she climbed up onto his hospital bed and hugged him. I forgive you, she said simply. If Mommy loved you, then you must be good. Jonathan's arms closed around her, and he held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Which, I realized, she was. She was his daughter, and this was the first time he had ever held her. I turned away, giving them their moment, and found myself crying for the first time since this whole complicated mess began. Not tears of anger or grief, but something else. Something that felt like healing. Over the next 2 weeks, we visited Jonathan every day after school. Veda brought him her homework to show him, read him stories from her favorite books, and peppered him with questions about everything from his childhood to his opinion on whether dogs were better than cats. Slowly, carefully, we began to tell her more of the truth. That Jonathan had loved her mother very much, but had been too scared to stay with her. That he had made choices he regretted, but that those choices didn't mean he hadn't cared. That sometimes love isn't enough to overcome fear and circumstances. It was during one of these visits that Veda, with the innocent wisdom of childhood, asked the question that changed everything. If you're my mommy's friend, and you loved her, does that make you like my daddy? The room went completely silent. Jonathan looked at me, asking permission with his eyes to tell her the truth. I thought about all the years I had protected her from this knowledge, all the nights she had cried because she didn't have a father like other kids, all the questions I had deflected because I thought the truth would hurt her more than ignorance. Yes, sweetheart, I said softly. That's exactly what it makes him. Veda looked from me to Jonathan and back again, processing this information with the adaptability that children possess. So you're my daddy, she said to Jonathan, testing the words. If you want me to be. She considered this seriously. I always wanted a daddy. But I thought daddies were supposed to live with their kids and help with homework and come to school plays. You're right, Jonathan said. That's what daddies are supposed to do. I can't live with you or help with your homework every day, but I can love you with all my heart for whatever time I have left. Are you going to die soon? The directness of the question stunned us both, but Jonathan answered honestly. Yes, Veda. Probably in a few weeks. She thought about this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Then we better make sure you know all the important stuff about me before then. And that's exactly what they did. For the remaining weeks of Jonathan's life, Veda made sure he understood who she was. She brought photo albums from home, showed him her report cards, taught him her favorite songs. She made him promise to watch over her from heaven, the same way her mother did. In return, Jonathan told her stories about her mother that I had never known. How Sarah laughed so hard at movies that she snorted. How she always ordered the same thing at restaurants because she was afraid to try something new and not like it. How she had the softest heart for stray animals and homeless people and anyone who needed help. "She sounds like you," he told Veda one afternoon as she was coloring at his bedside table. "Kind and brave and smart. Grandma says I have her eyes but someone else's nose. You have my nose," he said quietly. Veda touched her nose thoughtfully. "It's a good nose." "I think so too." When Jonathan died 3 weeks later, it was peaceful. Veda and I were there, along with Dr. Reeves and a nurse who had become fond of our daily visits. Veda held his hand and told him she loved him and that she would take care of Grandma for him. The funeral was small, attended mostly by his business associates, who seemed surprised to discover that he had a daughter. Margaret, his estranged wife, came and spoke briefly with me afterward. She was gracious and sad, and she told me she was glad he had found Veda before he died. "He was different these last weeks," she said. "Happier, even though he was dying. You gave him something he didn't know he needed." 3 days after the funeral, Jonathan's lawyer called to discuss the will. The meeting was held in his downtown office, all mahogany and leather, and the quiet efficiency of serious money. Mr. Whitmore was very specific about his wishes, the lawyer explained, spreading documents across the conference table. The bulk of his estate, approximately $200 million, is to be held in trust for Veda until her 25th birthday, with Mrs. Morgan as the trustee. The numbers still didn't feel real. $200 million. Enough money to ensure that Veda would never have to worry about rent or groceries or medical bills the way I had for the past 8 years. However, the lawyer continued, there are some conditions. I looked up, suddenly wary. Even in death, Jonathan was going to try to control our lives. The money is to be used exclusively for Veda's benefit. Education, medical care, housing, reasonable living expenses. Mrs. Morgan, you're also provided for with a separate trust of $10 million to ensure you're never financially dependent on Veda's inheritance. $10 million for me. There's more money than I had ever imagined having. Enough to quit cleaning houses forever. Enough to give Veda the grandmother she deserved instead of one who was always exhausted and worried about money. There's one more thing, the lawyer said, reaching into his briefcase. Mr. Whitmore asked me to give this to Veda personally. It was a small jewelry box, similar to the one that had held Sarah's watch. Inside was a locket, gold and delicate, with an inscription on the back. "For my daughter, with all my love. Dad." Inside the locket were 2 tiny photographs, one of Sarah, taken when she was young and laughing, and one of Jonathan from around the same time period. That evening, as I fastened the locket around Veda's neck, she looked at herself in the mirror with satisfaction. "Now I have both of them with me," she said simply. "Yes, you do. Grandma, are we rich now?" I thought about how to explain the concept of $200 million to an 8-year-old. "We're comfortable, sweetheart. We don't have to worry about money anymore." "Good. Can we get the kitty from behind our building some real food now, and maybe take her to the vet?" I laughed, realizing that even with all this money, Veda's priorities remained exactly the same. Take care of the people and animals who needed help. Be kind, be brave. Yes, sweetheart. We can definitely take care of the kitty. 6 months later, we moved into a house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools and a big yard where Veda could play. But we kept our routine of visiting Sarah's grave every Sunday, bringing flowers and updating her on how Veda was doing in school, how she was learning piano, how she had decided she definitely wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She found her daddy, Sarah, I told the headstone one autumn afternoon while Veda arranged fresh daisies in the vase. It wasn't the way any of us would have chosen, but she found him. And he loved her exactly the way you knew he would, if he ever got the chance to know her. The watch, Sarah's watch, now sits on Veda's dresser, in a place of honor next to the locket her father gave her. She's too young to wear it yet, but she likes to hold it sometimes while she's doing homework or reading before bed. It tells time backward, she told me one evening, studying the crack in the face. It goes from when Mommy had it to when Daddy had it to when I have it, like a story moving through our family. That's exactly what it is, I realized. The watch isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's proof that love persists, even when people make mistakes, even when circumstances tear families apart, even when time runs out too soon. It's proof that sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to do the right thing. And sometimes, that's enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.